And when you delay young marriage, just know that the temptation doesn't go away, the urge doesn't go away, and there's going to be a challenge to maintain that self-control longer and longer. Hey, all you Maven Parent Podcast listeners out there, we've been in this relationship for quite a long time now, and I want to suggest that it's time to take it to the subscribe level. So, actually, we
sounds weird.
Are serious. It's not weird when you're talking about podcasts and YouTube to say subscribe. And so I want to encourage you, please subscribe and continue to not just build our platform, no, build our audience, but that helps you to ensure that you don't ever miss a riveting episode of the Maven Parent Podcast.
Also, what they say, and by they, I don't know who I'm talking about specifically.
Our listeners.
No, I'm saying
turn to the camera and talk to the listeners.
So they say when people leave reviews and things, then that gets more people when they're searching for like parenting podcasts. Then the more reviews we have, that helps people to find the content. So that's what they say.
That's from your extensive
that's
social
from my
media research. Yeah. No, actually, it's true. We want to encourage you to do two things. Subscribe to the podcast. If you watch this on YouTube, subscribe. As the kids say,
what do they say?
Hit the subscribe button.
No, Micah said hit the smash the
smash the subscribe button.
The hit button.
Okay, someone's gonna grab that clip as like a blooper reel.
Oh,
right there.
gosh!
Look at these old people. Smash the subscribe button and ring the bell. That's the note. The bell is the notifications.
Oh, my gosh!
So seriously, folks, subscribe and then also leave a review, especially if you're listening to this on a podcast platform. We do want you to leave feedback.
Yeah.
Only if it's good, though, of course. If you don't like this podcast, then
keep quiet about it.
Feel free to leave at any time.
My gosh.
No, actually, Erin's right. It does help drive people to the content, and hopefully you're listening because you find this to be helpful content as you try to navigate a chaotic world with your kids. So,
okay, Brett. So I have a Bible verse to read to you to remind you of how lucky you are to have me. So this comes from Proverbs 5.
Is this like the Ephesians? Oh, this is in Ephesians 5 that I needed to lay my life down for you. And
oh, no, I could read that to you later if you want.
Oh, I read that every day.
Sure. No, this is Proverbs 5. And it talks about how lucky you are to have me. So this is what it says. Proverbs 5:18 says, "Let your fountain be blessed and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe." That's how it describes me.
I am rejoicing. Is that good?
Yes. And then it goes on. There's a X-rated part that I won't say. And then it says, "Be intoxicated always in her love." Mm-hmm. So I thought that would be a good way to kick off this practical part of talking about the topic of marriage.
I'm thinking about all these sarcastic comments in my mind.
I'm sure you are. That's why I just kept going. I just kept going so you couldn't make comments.
We want to keep this clean for the kids.
PG, in case kids are listening in the background. So,
yes,
young marriage, the proverb seems to be in favor of young marriage, and if you get married, to stay married and to enjoy each other into long years of life together.
And that's what we talked about on our last podcast, is this whole idea of young marriage and whether or not we should encourage our kids to get married young. And we've said, look, hey, whether your kids are 2 or 12 or 20, this is a podcast, I think, for all of those age ranges of kids that we're raising, and thinking through marriage, the biblical view of marriage, and why encouraging Christian kids to get married young may be a good thing. Not necessarily a good thing in all circumstances,
of course, yeah.
right? I can just imagine people getting a hold of this title and being like, okay, they're those crazy Christians. But there is one sense where a secular culture that continues to delay marriage further and further out is going to look at something like this and say, that's crazy. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And I think I'm thinking about a couple different things. One thing is you mentioning it's not just for parents of teenagers, because we actually start forming our kids' views on things like marriage when they are young. Yeah. And our kids when they were young would say, like, one day when I get married, or I never want to get married, especially girls when they start getting older
boys and girls
realize
kind of prior to 12, prior to puberty.
Yes.
Yeah. It's actually a healthy view when they look at each other and go, ooh,
disgusting. So you have all these things come up with our kids. So how do we talk about it? Do we say, oh, well, don't, I mean, jokingly, we've said to all of our daughters, well, don't even get married till you're 30. Mostly because the thought of your 5-year-old daughter getting married is just crushing. So you don't want to think about it. But
the thought of any daughter getting married is crushing to a father.
So you do end up talking about it. I think sometimes we don't realize that we are forming their views about things when they're young, and we don't realize it. So it is for us to think about when our kids are young.
You cannot not communicate.
Yeah. And then I think too, knowing in the first podcast we talked about, I was 20 when we got married, almost 21. You had just turned 23. And so one pushback I could see us getting is, oh, well, you guys are advocating for this because you got married when you were young and it's worked out for you. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know people, we have friends who got married around the same time as us and it didn't work out. And so we don't live in this false, silly world where we think, oh, it worked for us, it works for everybody.
Right. Yeah.
And we also don't live in a fantasy world. And the 25 years we've been married have not just been easy and no work. We've had lots of conflict. We've had lots of things that we've had to work through. It has been difficult.
It has been difficult.
No, don't.
You just set me up, honey. You set me up.
I should have kept talking. I shouldn't have paused.
I'm agreeing with you. But was there a but to this?
Well, go ahead. If you're going to say something nice, I'll let you.
Well, I think given a Christian worldview and what we said in the last podcast, right? James chapter 1, Romans chapter 5, this idea that trial and tribulation and struggle is a tool that God uses to shape our character. Mm-hmm. And I think the way that some people have talked about, marriage and family, and it's God's design not merely to make us happy, but to make us holy. Mm-hmm. And so if that's in view, that is part of God's design for us as well, that he wants to form our character. Hey, trials and struggles and difficulties are good things. Mm-hmm. And this is where in hindsight, we can look at those things and we can say, yeah, you know what? The struggle has been good. Mm-hmm. And as we have matured together through those struggles, through those difficulties, through all the testing that you put me through, it has been a good thing for
yeah, because it usually maturity. Is in hindsight, actually, because it's not like in the moment when we're fighting that we're like, this is so good.
Sometimes I do.
I'm sure.
I listen to the words of the Apostle Paul. I exult in my tribulations.
Yes.
And so when we're fighting, I'm exulting, honey.
Really, because I remember a scene when our first year of marriage and we were up late fighting and we were sitting on the couch. Do you remember? And
that was one of those like 3-hour knockdown, drag out fights where you were really stubborn. And yeah.
So I remember this scene and we were sitting there on the couch and either we had finally just compromised or worked it out, or we were just so exhausted we stopped talking.
Or you had given in to my iron will.
I definitely didn't do that. So we were sitting there and I just remember us being exhausted and then saying to one another, like, is this how it's going to be?
We were shell-shocked.
For the rest of our lives? Because this isn't fun. This is terrible. And so you're a liar. You have not always rejoiced in the moment of it. Yeah. But it's true that in hindsight is, when you're in it, it's difficult, and that's what you're feeling. Yeah. And so all of that to say, we don't have these rosy glasses, and that we don't live in a fantasy world. We understand the difficulties of life. But what we're wanting to do is to think about this issue from a Christian worldview. And our culture, for sure, is not for young marriage. And so the question for Christians is God for young marriage?
Yeah. And that's where we can affirm that God is for marriage, right? From Scripture. God is for marriage. And then you have, a proverb like this. It talks about the wife of your youth, which gives some indication, but it could be the sense of, well, hey, your first wife, because, what is considered your youth if you get married when you're 18 or when you get married when you're 28, right? So there are some clear principles that we can lay out that marriage is God's design. It's good for us. It actually, and one of the goods is that it images Christ's relationship to believers and, to the body. And you got the idea of, the bride and the bridegroom. And so there's so much rich significance to marriage on all kind of different levels. But I think kind of what we want to hit on today is how marriage is beneficial, right? Because and we just don't talk about these kind of aspects very much. But I think it's giving it some of the why, like why we would be for young marriage, because here are some of the incredible benefits that seem to come along by following God's design of marriage. And being married young can actually get you on that path a little bit earlier. And I think what we'll see, and kind of what we're going to cover today, is stuff that you might say is reasonable. It's based on some sociological evidence. It's maybe some common sense. And the whole idea here is to say, okay, in the last podcast, we laid out some of the scriptural stuff, of course, not comprehensively, but we wanted to just whet the appetite for that. And so from a biblical worldview, marriage is good. And guess what? Because the Bible describes reality accurately, reality then is going to come in with confirmation to that. And we talk about this all the time, and I think it's kind of, one of the drums that we have to beat all the time. The Bible is not simply a self-help book. The Bible doesn't just contain some, good stories about, spiritual lessons about, Jesus and God's work. It is also a description of reality. It gives us the true story of reality. Okay, so if that's the case, and marriage is God's design, and it's good for us, it's part of, his intended creation, then we should see the nature of reality support that. Okay, so one of the ways that we see reality bearing on this issue is that young marriage can actually provide benefits for that young couple. You can say there are advantages for the young married versus delaying marriage. And so benefit number one would be professional, and maybe we could link these together, professional and financial benefits, right?
Well, that seems to go against, I think, the cultural narrative for sure, because the narrative is you wait to get married until you have a good savings account, or you wait to get married till your career is really taken off. So
yeah, so and again, now these are going to be generalities, and we might be able to argue that in most cases this is the case, but I think what we have in marriage, okay, so you could have two independent people who are working on their own, building their career, right, and kind of stockpiling their own resources, And then then get married because now you're ready financially. Okay. Well, think about that. I mean, just common sense here. If you are living separately, building your careers, you are not only going to have two careers and two incomes, but they're also going to have two sets of bills. And so, hey, this person's paying rent or a mortgage. This person's also going to be paying rent. That you're going to have, utility bills and whatever, all that. So you actually can maybe not quite double, but you certainly can increase the bills. And then you're a single resource versus a young married couple. They get to pool those resources.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, and it's not just in thinking of the finances, the financial side of things. It's also thinking about the professional side of things. And I'm thinking about us when we got married. I had just graduated, and you had 2 years left in college. And so I was able to work full time while you were able to finish off your degree, and you didn't have to worry about working because we were able to depend upon my income. And there are a lot of couples who have that situation where the husband or the wife works and supports the family so that the other one can continue maybe some of their professional development. And you were able to finish your studies and get your bachelor's degree. And so there's, this is why I think we kind of link professional and financial, because that can set the stage for what happens, later on. And so we were able to pull our resources together and decrease our bills. It's, you didn't have to pay rent somewhere. And then I had to pay rent somewhere, but we were able to pool those resources.
Yeah. So I think that is such a good thing to think about, that oftentimes we just don't think that way. It's we push young people to do it on their own. And now if you haven't found someone, that's fine. But if you are in a situation where the young person has found the person they want to marry, why wouldn't you pull the resources? In that way, it does make common sense, to your point. So a good point to make. And of course, in our case too, this was the case, but thinking about professional and financially, we were so young. We were young when we got married. And so as we grew professionally and financially, we were growing together. And so we were learning a lot together and figuring out what things we wanted to prioritize. And we had to come together and compromise on that. But to do it together right from the beginning.
Yeah, we were able to grow financially together, right? So we come from two very different families. How we buy things, what we buy, what to invest money in, where to spend resources, were different. And not necessarily we would say one was always right and the other was always wrong. And maybe sometimes both, we might look and say, yeah, both of us were wrong on how we viewed that, and able to form that together, which you just see the value in that. And that relates to what we talked about last podcast when we talked about oneness, right? You're able to maybe grow more easily in your oneness when it comes to financial matters and material resources in young marriage. And you just think about how it really can shape our attitudes about money, about finances, about career from a very young age, but growing in that together. And you think about the difficulty for an older couple, right? Or the increased difficulty. And again, not in every situation, but hey, you're 35, you're 40 years old, and you've been living on your own and kind of just self-sufficient, which is good. But you have 40 years of developing habits and kind of growing in your self-sufficiency. And then, you then get married, and there's just, again, we talked about not being as malleable. And I'm trying to be sensitive. Not saying that when you're 40, that's necessarily the case, but I'm guessing that most couples who have gotten married later would say, yep, that was one thing that was difficult. And I think even you mentioned that in the podcast last week. Hey, we know some couples who have said that to us recently.
Yeah, and financially, you wait later in life to get married, and you most likely will have a spouse who's collected debt. Debt is so common in American culture, and it's hard to take on someone else's debt that you weren't there to be a part of.
Yeah.
And you think about, debts we've had, houses, cars, things like, but we've decided to do that together. And there's a difference to tackling debt together that we accumulated.
Yeah.
And getting married and taking on someone's $40,000 credit card debt or school debt. I mean, there's all kinds of things. And so it's, again, it's not in every case, but it's just something to think about.
Yeah. And, another thought that occurred to me is that when you start early and you start sharing resources and you start moving towards that oneness, even in your finances, and you combine bank accounts. In fact, just a couple weeks ago, there was an article out on the data that shows a correlation between couples who combine their bank accounts versus couples who keep their bank accounts separate, and how there is greater rates of divorce in those couples that keep them separate. And so as a young couple with not a lot of money to bring to the table, generally speaking, right?
Certainly in our case.
Young, barely graduated from college kids come together. You don't have a whole lot. And so what you get to do is you get to build wealth together.
Yeah.
Right. And you get to buy a house together and, buy the things that you need together. And we've never thought, it occurs to me that there's never been conversation in our marriage that, hey, things aren't even financially. Or, hey, we need to make sure it's 50-50 here. Like there needs to be an even split. I'm doing just as much work as you are in this thing. And so let's make sure the resources and the finances are even. We've never had that conversation because I think this, what contributes to that and what can really help in that is young marriage, where we, from the get-go, it was like, all right, let's throw in together and we're in this together, and what's yours is mine, and what's mine is yours.
I know
sometimes,
you want to make
sometimes I make the joke that
sometimes
Erin says that, what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine. Right. And you do say that sometimes.
I never say that, whatever.
I never said that? It sounds
no.
I can certainly recall a few times.
Okay. So second point about the benefits of of marrying young is that when you're younger, you are positioned,
generally speaking,
in that stage of life with a larger dating pool of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to consider for the advice we give the young people in our church, to say, no, wait. We might be pushing them into a stage of life where the pool of people to date and to find a spouse in is smaller and smaller.
Yeah, and therefore it's maybe increasingly more difficult to find a good partner.
Yeah.
This is something to consider. Again, we're speaking in generalities, but it seems just like common sense. When you are in college, and let's say you're at a university where there's 30,000 people, right? There's a larger dating pool. And generally in college, you're maybe more active because you haven't gotten into your career. So there's a little more time for the social aspects. You're involved maybe in a college ministry where there's a bunch of single people there. That is just common sense, that there's kind of a larger dating pool. And I mean, you can talk to older singles who do want to date and maybe want to get married at some point in the future, and they'll tell you the difficulty of finding places in your later 20s and in your 30s, finding places where there are good prospects for marriage, right?
Good Christian people to meet. That once you do start full-time in your career, you do have less time for activities like when you're in college. And yeah, you kind of are around the people you work with, and that's typically a lot smaller pool of people than when you were in college and that stage of life. So something to think about.
Yeah, so a second benefit, right? A third benefit of young marriage is the possibility. And again, I mean, I always want to kind of position this and preface ourselves here, but generally speaking, there is less time to be in multiple relationships where maybe there's increased hurt or poor decisions, mistakes, where then you're bringing increased relational baggage into the relationship. And look, I mean, let's admit, we all are going to be bringing baggage into our relationships, right? We're fallen creatures. And so there's not a single one of us that sin hasn't touched. But we can certainly say some of us can come into marriage with more baggage than others. I mean, that's just the case in this life. And if you are in your late 20s, early 30s, and have been in multiple relationships versus in your early 20s and less relationships, or maybe even none at that point, like serious dating relationships, then that can prevent you from bringing in a lot of that baggage and hurt. And it prohibits kind of the revolving door of relationships, you know?
Yeah. I was talking to an older Christian man about this topic. As we mentioned in the first podcast, our 21-year-old son's engaged. So this topic of young marriage has been coming up in conversations for us. But he was saying to me, think about, and he admitted giving this advice to his kids. Wait to get married. Don't be in a rush. A rush is something he talked about. And so he said now he regrets giving his kids that advice because he said, if you wait to get married till you're 30, you most likely have had several heartbreaks. And he said there's probably several people you've fallen in love with, gotten hurt, it didn't work out, you've recovered, you've moved on. And anyway, I was thinking about that when he talked, and this is your point.
Yeah.
That when we give advice to young people about waiting, this is something we need to think about because, of course, in general, we're attracted to people of the opposite sex, and so you are going to have dating relationships, and so are we pushing young people to say, no, wait. And then so we're creating this habit of if something gets hard, then they exit the relationship. And then by the time they're in their 30s, they have a lot of hurt.
Yeah.
A lot of hurt.
Yeah, because you don't always recover from those relationships, right? And then we can sometimes from that hurt and that pain come into a new relationship and very easily project that stuff onto the next relationship, the next person. And all of us, can and do that. And so it's just kind of wise counsel to consider what we open our kids up to if we encourage delay. Now, again, doesn't mean it's necessarily going to happen, but you just see, I think, some of the wisdom that we're trying to spell out here.
Yeah.
And actually, research shows that when there are more experiences with different partners, that actually undermines relationship. It's linked to worse marriages in later on. So that's a third benefit. Fourth benefit, Erin, I'll let you introduce this one because I'm just not comfortable with these topics.
So the fourth benefit being sex.
What did you say? Do
Okay.
we want to go there on this podcast?
So if little kids are around, you might want to turn the volume down or put your AirPods in your ear if you're listening to this with kids around.
You already said the S word. The little kids are in the back of the car seat right now going, Mommy, what is sex?
Oh my gosh. So delayed marriage does not mean delayed sex. So if we're pushing our young people in our families and our churches to delay marriage, are we assuming they're delaying sex? And if we are, we might need to read some statistics on the fact that they're not waiting for sex. So are we pushing them towards something that the Apostle Paul warns about in 1 Corinthians 5 about if you can stay single like Paul, then he says, stay single, it's good. But then he says, but if you have passion
burn
in passion, then get married.
Yeah.
Get married.
That's why you were pushing me for marriage so young.
Pushing you. I don't remember it that way, but anyway.
Well, yeah, this is where we have to think about the flip side of encouraging young people to wait to get married, right? Are we then setting up greater temptation for them to sleep together or for them to even maybe compromise and cohabit, right? And move in together. And so we could be nudging them in those directions by our cultural pressure, right? To delay marriage.
Yeah, because they want to be with this person. These are good things and natural desires that we don't want young people to feel like something's wrong with them. And so if a young couple loves each other and they want to get married, why do we tell them, no, wait, and make it harder on them in this area of sex?
Yeah. Well, and you can just contrast that with a secular culture. Of course, secular culture is going to say, no, wait, because it's okay. It's fine for you to be sexually active when you're young and you're in your 20s anyway.
Yeah.
And of course, we're assuming here a biblical framework where God has reserved marriage because of its design, because of what you said, Erin, its power, its ability to create oneness, right? All of these good things. It's reserved for marriage. And so that's a good thing to communicate to our young people that, hey, one of the benefits of young marriage is that you do get to sleep together. That's not a bad thing. And again, of course, we got to preface, right? We live in a sexually broken world. And so it's not going to guarantee a happily ever after. This is not, purity culture, baggage, junk, whatever. No, we're saying, hey, sex is God's good design, and it's designed for marriage within the context of marriage, and that's a good thing. And when you delay young marriage, just know that the temptation doesn't go away, the urge doesn't go away, and there's going to be a challenge to maintain that self-control longer and longer. So that's actually a benefit of young marriage, is that you get to engage with your lover who you're married to, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you said about the purity culture baggage and how, of course, the promise of waiting until you're married isn't wait till you're married and you'll have the happily ever after, but it's that in the security and confidence and safety of marriage, then when difficulties come up in all areas, not just sex, you have a devoted partner with you.
Yeah.
Even though you'll have seasons maybe where you're not connecting well, you're struggling in your marriage, whatever it is, you have each other, you have the commitment. That's the way God wants it to be. He knows that that's where we'll flourish the most. And this idea of cohabiting and, the more sexual partners you have, the better, or to try it out before you get married.
Try
before you buy, all the things. one resource, we love to give you guys resources, as you know. One resource that I think is fantastic in this. So one book, and then mention the articles too.
Okay.
But Glenn Stanton wrote a book, The Ring Makes All the Difference, The Hidden Consequences of Cohabitation and the Strong Benefits of Marriage. The Ring Makes All the Difference. It's an older book, but the truths in it are good today too. So anyway, that is a fantastic book to maybe read with some young people who have a false idea about cohabiting before you get married, being sexual with each other before you married. This will help your marriage to be better. And that would be a great resource to go through with them.
Yeah. So those are 4 benefits to young marriage. Now, again, doesn't mean it guarantees a happily ever after, but just applying some common sense and wisdom. I think seeing how reality bears this out, there can be some huge benefits to young marriage. And so maybe what we need to think about is how in the church we create an alternative culture. Mm-hmm. The culture out there is saying, no, delay, find self-fulfillment first, do it on your own, and then, get married. And so we need to maybe have a counterculture that says, hey, marriage is good. It's God's design. If you can get married young, that can be a really good thing. And there can be some great growth together and some oneness that fosters. So let's support this. Mm-hmm. And so one of the very first things that we can do is, as we talk about marriage, talk about it in terms of God's design, right? What is God's design for marriage and family? And to show that it is good. We need to be talking in the church positively about marriage. Of course, realistically about marriage, but also positively that this is God's design and it is such an amazing tool to shape who we are and shape our character.
Yeah, I think this is one of the areas that we can grow in as Christian people. Of course, we're honest about the difficulties of marriage, but do we ever highlight the good?
Well, remember the story.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Were you going to go to the girl? Talk about the girl? Oh,
yeah. So
see, this is the oneness that Erin and I have achieved because we got married.
So you were speaking at an event in Florida, and I went along with you on this trip. This was a few years ago, and the youth pastor there and his fiance, they had just gotten engaged. So anyway, we met them, and then she said to me, that she just got engaged. And I said, oh my gosh, congratulations. I said, that's so wonderful. And I said, marriage is such a wonderful gift from God. And her eyes filled with tears. Mm-hmm. And she said, you are the first person that's reacted that way to me. And she said, everyone else says, oh, congratulations, get ready for it to be hard. Or you're in for it, just wait. Marriage is hard, marriage is difficult. And I was the first person, and they went to this big church that had rejoiced and first emphasized the gift of marriage rather than the struggle of marriage. And that's what we mean. Do we express joy in marriage and communicate that to the young people around us?
Yeah, and this is where maybe we see how we have been influenced by the secular culture around us, right? And we just think, oh, yeah, get ready for the difficulty, versus, oh my gosh, this young couple is coming together and living out God's design. Isn't that something to rejoice in and to be grateful for, right? And then we're also informed by a biblical worldview that says we are fallen and there will be difficulties, but even in that, it's only Christianity, it's only Christ who can redeem that and turn those struggles into character and maturity. And so that's another good part of it. And so, so that kind of leads us to the second point, just real practically, is share not only the positives, but also discuss the hard times. And we lay out a realistic view. on marriage for young people, but still encouraging them towards marriage, because then we put the difficulties in the proper context, the biblical context of James 1 and Romans 5, and what Scripture says about character and maturity that's built through trials.
Mm-hmm. And I think, this can even be talked about in families that have brokenness too. Mm-hmm. And of course, if you've listened to the podcast, our story is that I was a single mom. So when we got married, I had our daughter Lexi, and then you were able to adopt her a few years later. And so we are a blended family. And so even within your own brokenness, if you have brokenness, you can still talk about God's design being good.
Yeah.
And even if, especially as they get older and you explain more and more about your own brokenness, always pointing back to God's a redeemer of the broken, but his original design was so good. And that's what we want to point our kids towards.
Yeah. And this is where in our churches and in our families, if we're going to encourage young marriage, that we also support young married couples. Mm-hmm. And so thinking through, okay, my son and my new daughter-in-law are going to be married. They're going to be young. There's going to be struggles. And of course, those struggles are good. And they're not going to be able to, maybe afford everything that they want. And that's good. And that's okay. And you grow together through that. But also at times making sure that their needs are met, mm-hmm. and supporting them in different ways. Mm-hmm. And not just physically and financially, but emotionally and spiritually. And, and maybe it's a church saying, hey, we're going to do something. We're going to be very intentional in what we do with the young couples that get mm-hmm. married in our church.
Yeah.
And so you and I have been talking about this for our church. And it's actually our son and his fiance who are going to be the first married couple in our new church here. And so thinking about, well, what is it that we could do mm-hmm. as a church to support them? How about, here's an idea, once a month in the first year of their marriage, a older, wiser couple takes them out to dinner and checks in on them and offers some advice. Mm-hmm. And we do that for, 6 months or 12 months in that first year of marriage. That's just one way we can very intentionally help encourage them and support mm-hmm. them versus, okay, you're married. All right, you're on your own. Good luck.
Yeah. Yeah, and you even think of the buildup to marriage. I'm thinking about what you're saying, and my mind's churning with all these ideas. But a young couple in your church that they're dating seriously, so they're probably talking about marriage. Why not come alongside them in that too? And of course, because we don't want young people to feel like this figuring out a marriage partner is something they have to do on their own. Mm. In our family, we talk a lot with our kids about, when you're dating someone, we want them to come over. We want to know them. And then especially once you're thinking about marriage, we want to be part of that decision. As a church community, we can offer that to young people.
Yeah. And it's not out of control,
no.
Because I'm just thinking of how people
out
can
of trying to control.
Yeah.
No.
You say we want to be part of that decision.
Yeah.
We don't want to be a part of that decision because we want to have control. No, it's Proverbs, right? Mm-hmm. An abundance of counselors.
Yes.
It's saying, hey, help give me some perspective. I'm in this relationship. I'm falling in love. My emotions are high. I've lost my rationality. How can you help me think wisely about this?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm thinking about two of our friends, Tim and Michelle Thetford, and at their church, they do, so little shout out to Tim and Michelle, but they do premarital counseling with some of the couples, and they run the college group. But it's basically they start meeting with couples who are thinking, okay, we're dating seriously and we're thinking about marriage. And so they come along, these couples, and they've been married, I think, 30 years themselves, and have this amazing ministry to young people of they're all for young marriage, Tim and Michelle are, and they want to help the young people in their church to do it wisely. Yeah. And I think that's such an amazing ministry to have. So yeah, we need to be people who support it and come alongside young people.
Yeah. And, the data shows that actually young marriage young marriages are less likely to end in divorce. Now, again, we're not saying this is a guarantee, but look at the Institute for Family Studies, okay? Solid organization that is all about supporting the family, and they look at a lot of data. Dr. Brad Wilcox is a great scholar there, and they have looked at the evidence that suggests, in particular, religious Americans. So that's a whole nother topic. They're less likely to divorce, even as they are more likely to marry younger than the age of 30. And so very interesting data when you look at Christian young people or religious young people, getting married before the age of 30 results in less divorces, okay? And they looked at also the idea of comparing it with cohabitation. Religious men and women who are married in their 20s without cohabiting first have lower odds of divorce in the U.S. And so, again, no guarantees, but what that suggests is that, hey, this is built into the structure of reality. Marriage is a good thing. Young marriage can be a very good thing. It's certainly consistent with the Christian worldview. And common sense says that it can really be helpful in terms of that young couple becoming one more effectively. And doesn't mean that God doesn't work in all situations. And that's the great thing. Even as we talk about God's creational design, in the very same breath, we can also talk about God's redemptive work. And there's plenty of wonderful stories out there of couples who have maybe experienced the brokenness. And they would probably cheer this on and say, no, you're absolutely right. Even though I didn't do it that way. And I experienced the brokenness, but maybe there was, a remarriage, a biblical remarriage where then now they're flourishing. And that just points to God's redemption. Maven exists to help the next generation know truth, pursue goodness, and create beauty for the cause of Christ. To find out more, check out maventruth.com.